All righty. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you again. You didn't see me make the finger quotes I just made in the air. But as always, I'm going to thank THRAB for having me and thank the NHPRC for funding these workshops because I really love doing them and I'm hoping they are useful for you all. So, just kind of a title slide. And here we are at week 2. We are doing risk assessment this week and talking about choosing what kind of a plan you're going to write. How is your plan going to look? Because I kind of feel like if you choose your template early on, then it makes it easier to do the research because you can just target what your template tells you you need. So my goals for the day, by the end of today, you're going to know how to assess your risks, which is important because you want to know what kinds of emergencies are most likely to affect your archives. If you're in El Paso, maybe not so much hurricanes, but if you're in Houston or Galveston, hurricanes are going to be your worst nightmare. We'll talk a little bit about how to research emergency plans and choose your template. So we're going to start out today by recapping what we did last week, just a quick refresher and a bring up to speed for anybody who wasn't able to be here last week. We'll talk about the preliminary research you're going to do. I'm going to tell you about a bunch of emergency plan templates that I recommend using that you can start your research on. And we will spend a good chunk of time on risk assessment. So what did we learn last week? We talked about types of emergencies, like floods. And when we talked about floods, we talked about the fact that floods were very damaging to our materials and get them wet and make them fall off shelves and all of that fun stuff. We also talked about the fact that flood water is not nice, clean tap water. It is a health hazard for you. So we talked a little bit about the fact that you need to take care of yourself. We talked about fire, obviously burning things, but we also talked about the fact that fire was a water disaster. And we talked about if you have a sprinkler system, knowing how to turn that sprinkler system off as soon as a fire is out to minimize the amount of water that you have to deal with. And we talked about the fact that there are so many other kinds of emergencies, everything from earthquakes to pest infestations to terrorism. I did not put pandemic on the list of emergencies, but I think going forward, I'm going to have to update and include that. After that, we talked about the planning process and just give a quick rundown of the steps: choosing your team, doing your research, and risk assessment, assembling your contact lists, writing your plan, and implementing your plan and training your staff. And we will be going through those in excruciating detail over the next couple of weeks. We talked about who needed to be on your team and that we needed to have people from every department so that you could gather information easily, but also so that you could spread information easily. And we talked about the fact that you needed a backup for everybody on your team, because if somebody is on vacation, that position needs to be covered. We also talked about writing team membership into job descriptions to make sure that those positions are always full. And finally, we talked about working with first responders and that they are some of your best friends out there. And we talked about having them come through your building. We talked about working with them on your team. And we talked quite a bit about the incident command system, which is the organizational sort of language that people use to communicate during a disaster. And we talked about taking incident command training so that you could speak that language as well. And I hope that some of you, maybe if you're doing some work from home and needed some kind of work from home projects, that maybe some of you did that this week. You can tell me that it was not the most earth-shatteringly interesting thing in the world, but you were still glad that you did it. So before we go on, I wanted to give you all a chance if you have any lingering questions from last week, to give you a second to go ahead and put those in the questions. And I completely forgot to respond to Peggy's promise that I would indeed tell you how I was going to respond to questions and answers. And you can put your questions in the question box as you think of them. And if I see them, I will answer them, especially if it makes sense in the context of what we're talking about. And if I don't see them, I will answer them at the end, and you can also type in more at the end. And Dina missed last week and wants to find ICT training. So you can, first of all, if you missed last week, you can watch all of the webinar, and Peggy sent out an email with that address. But the incident command training there's on the resource list that's attached to your packet the resource list is going to be attached to your packet every week, so you don't have to keep digging it up again. The web address to find that training is on that handout. It's through FEMA. And Donna wants to know if recommendations are different for a small staff with 25 to 30 staff members. And that's a really interesting question. And I don't actually think that the recommendations are terribly different. I just think you're going to think about scale. So you probably don't need to have all 30 people on your team, but you still might want to have half a dozen people who have knowledge of various areas of your building and your organization. And I hope that makes sense. Okay, it looks like we are good on questions. So let's move on to this week's material. Oh, there we go. Every time I move to the dashboard, I have to remember to click my mouse so that I can move my slides on my screen. So we're going to start out talking about preliminary research and what kinds of things you should be reading before you really begin to do your planning. And one of the most important things to take away from this section or from this process is that there is no need to reinvent the wheel. At this point, emergency planning is really, really well documented. And there is so much information about it available online. Plus, there are books and articles in professional journals. So you are not in this alone. You are not creating your plan from scratch. Instead, think about it as tailoring what's out there to be useful for you. Hopefully that makes it seem less daunting. And some of my favorite research sites, the ALA has published a couple of LibGuides on emergency preparedness they're for libraries, but enough archives are in libraries that I think they're applicable. And so much of the material is equally applicable to libraries, museums, archives that you can just read and choose what you want. One of their LibGuides, which I think is really interesting, is a guide on how you can be useful to your community after an emergency, which is another really good tool to have in your back pocket for working with first responders. If there's a large-scale disaster in your community, you may not be affected, but the community may be, and there may be ways for you to help. Like one that got a lot of publicity in Texas a couple years ago was during the Wimberley Memorial Day floods. Their library served as a repository for people to bring photographs that they found, and people could come and look and pick up and reclaim their photographs, which was a lovely way to help. If you don't know about connecting to collections care, it is an amazing free resource that you should get on their mailing list so you know what they're up to. They do two main things. First, there's a forum that you can ask questions of, and people ask emergency preparedness and response questions there. And the great thing about the forums is that anybody can respond, but they are monitored by conservators. So if somebody who is well-intentioned but maybe doesn't have all the knowledge that they need pops on and says something that's a little bit out in left field, a conservator will hop in and redirect the conversation and make sure that the information is accurate. So that's awesome. It's a great place to just ask random questions when you want to put that question out wide. But the other thing that they do, and more useful, I think, for our purposes here, is every month they do a free webinar, and the webinars are recorded and put on their website forever. I think at this point there are easily over 100, if not close to 150, and a ton of them, probably a dozen at least, are on various aspects of emergency preparedness and response. So there's some basic stuff, but there's also an hour on working with disaster recovery companies, which could be really useful. So they are wonderful, and everything is free. And then there are just tons and tons of books and articles out there that you can find if you want to do even more research. But my favorite research to do, really, something I think is very useful, is just reading other people's disaster plans and seeing how they're handling it. There are lots posted online, and if you just Google library emergency response plan, archives emergency response plan, museum emergency response plan, you will come up with some, and you can sit and read to your heart's content. But also, if you have colleagues that have a plan at other institutions, ask them if they'll share so you can see what they're doing. And share yours if you're asked. We can only get better if we share that kind of information. You can certainly redact confidential information on any shared plans, and I would hope you would do that, but sharing is really useful. There's nothing like reading actual plans. So you're going to do a little preliminary research to see what plans look like, to see what you like, and then it will be time to choose a template and decide how you're going to do your plan. So I've got 4 that I'm going to talk about because they're all really good and they all hit different levels of complexity. So we're just going to go through on the next several slides and talk about what they are. The first one that I usually start people with, if I'm dealing with people who have no time, no experience, and we need to get them a quick emergency plan, I give people and just say, we're going to do the pocket response plan. It is a free template that was created by the Council of State Archivists. So you know that it is archive specific. Although if you are not somebody from an archives, there are generic templates that you can use. It is so simple and no frills. It is 1 page front and back and very customizable, so you can make it into what you want. And then the genius part of it is you print it on a sheet of legal paper, cut it out around the edges where they tell you, and fold it along the lines. It's kind of slightly origami. And it folds to wallet size, so you can just stick all your information in your wallet, which makes it really easy to have lots of plans off-site. It's easy to update it. If you want something to make it a little more fancy, Council of State Archivists will sell you little Tyvek envelopes to put the plan in, which are really cute. And I like this so much and think it is so useful that if I am writing a big plan for somebody, I always do this as an adjunct document to go with it. And I recommend that people do that as well. But if you only have a little bit of time and you need to start small, I kind of feel like 70% of the information that you get in a big plan that takes weeks to write, you can bang out in a couple of afternoons using the pocket response plan. And the links to all of these plans are on the resources handout, so you don't have to be Googling them to try and find them. The next thing I wanted to tell you about is the Field Guide to Emergency Response, which it's not really a plan, but it has plan-like elements and it's pretty great. It's published by the AIC, which is the trade organization for conservators, and is more of a handbook for after emergencies than planning for emergencies. And it tells you how to manage all of your emergency stuff. How do you set up a command center? Who should be doing salvage? But one of the things that it contains are a bunch of fillable tabs that include your key contacts, locations of supplies, etc. And it comes with supply lists and assessment forms. So if you buy this and you do fill it out, it serves as kind of a rudimentary plan. It's a book that I like so much, I bought a couple copies. If you're going to fill out your tabs, I would say fill them in pencil, because if you fill them in ink, it's forever and you can't update it. You can buy it from the AIC. It's 25 bucks usually, but in May, because May is the month we do emergency stuff, it is on sale for 20 bucks. So go buy it this week. When I started doing emergency preparedness stuff, my first template that I used was the California preservation template. And I still really, really, really like it because it is a good middle of the road option. It's not too much, but you can make it as much as you want. It's a Word template with no fancy formatting. The fanciest formatting they get is like numbers and bullets. And it's actually well formatted, which is nice. And it's customizable. You can delete what you want, put in what you want. It also comes with pre-written procedures and useful appendices, so you can take those procedures and look at them and see how they would work for your institution and just edit them, rather than having to rewrite all of the procedural stuff. Because remember, we are definitely not going to reinvent the wheel. So if you are working on a plan and have time to be working on a plan now, and you don't need something that you can just bang out in an afternoon or two, this is probably where I would tell you to start looking. I really think it's a good plan. And then the last plan I'm going to tell you about is D-Plan, which you've probably heard about. It is a free planning program created by NEDCC. NEDCC is the Northeast Document Conservation Center, who are one of the really big names in preservation, conservation. They're based in Massachusetts. They really are. They're like the 900-pound gorilla of preservation work. And they do really good stuff. So D-Plan is simple in that you just type in answers and push a button and it spits out a plan for you. The challenge with it for me is that they request so much data. The last time I looked at it, I think it was like 150 pages of data collection to do, which is an awful lot of work to ask, and it requires quite a bit of time. Totally doable. It's just, it's a commitment. It's fully automated, which is great because once you're in their system and you do your plan, every year they will send you a reminder reminding you to update it. When it was created, it was revolutionary. It's about 15 years old now. Yeah, look, copyright 2006. So the software seems really dated. And the trends are towards less expansive plans. They have been promising an update, I want to say, for a couple of years. And they've been saying, yeah, anytime now, anytime now. So I've given up on really telling people NEDCC saying it's going to be in 6 months. But I'm given to understand that most of the work is done. So it's certainly something to keep an eye out for. Obviously, I haven't been able to connect with NEDCC at a conference in a while. So yeah, keep an eye out because I'm very excited to see what they do with a new version, to see how they make it more user-friendly, to see how they make the software more current. And I don't know that I would recommend doing D-Plan right now, but once they get it updated, it may be my go-to. And then finally, if you don't like any of these solutions, keep looking for more solutions that you like, or just make your own plan. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but if the wheel doesn't work for you and you need something that's square, go ahead and make yourself a square. The important thing isn't that your tool look like everybody else's tool. The important thing is that your plan works for your organization. So I hope one of those templates will work for you, but if not, it's a big wide world. So let's go ahead now and talk about risk assessment. Risk assessment is one of the most crucial parts of emergency planning, and I would encourage you to spend some time with it because, yes, it'll pay dividends in making sure that your emergency plan is effective and useful for your organization, absolutely. But also, it will give you a much better understanding of your building and the needs of your collections and how your organization works. And I think that pays off not just in emergency planning, but in running your archives. So I would love to see you really dig in on the risk assessment. So the reason that we do risk assessment is that if we know what can go wrong, we can prepare for it and we can aim our efforts at the right places. If you live somewhere that's never going to have a hurricane, you don't have to worry about hurricanes. You have to worry about tornadoes, maybe. So if you do this detailed risk assessment, it'll help you figure out your vulnerabilities and it will help you mitigate them. It can help you with pre-emergency mitigation, right? If you know that you have leaks that come in, then you can mitigate that by buying spill pillows, which are amazing kind of super absorbent pads or pillows that you can put under leaks and they will just absorb water. Or by assigning the right people to put the trash cans under the leaks, however that works for you. Or it will help, or it will tell you what you need to fix, and it can help you with post mitigation because you will know what you are looking at happening, and you can make plans for how you're going to cope. So there are 3 major components of risk assessment, and we're going to look at all of them today. The first is a geographical risk assessment, which looks at where you are on the map. Because what's true for me here in Austin is probably not true for somebody up in Wichita Falls or down in Brownsville. We all have different geographies and different needs because of that. The second assessment is a facilities risk assessment, which looks really closely at your building because every building has different issues and challenges. Right? A flat roof has different problems than a cathedral ceiling. Or if you have skylights, that's a different problem than not having skylights. So you want to look hard at your facility, and luckily there are some really good tools so that you don't have to figure out all the things you should be looking at. And finally, you're going to do an institutional disaster history where you think about what kinds of emergencies have happened before. My very favorite risk assessment tool, and again, the link is in the handouts, it's free, go download it, use it, it will make them very happy, is the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation's Risk Evaluation and Planning Program. And the FAIC is just the foundation arm of the American Institute for Conservation. It gets complicated, but they are the ones who do a lot of the publishing of information. So their risk evaluation and planning program has 3 really good documents. It has a site questionnaire that asks you about your organization. It has a risk prioritization worksheet that asks about your geography, and it has a building walkthrough checklist. When you use it, you will see lots of references to the field guide we talked about half a dozen or so slides ago, because it was created by the same people, but you don't need to have the field guide to use it. Doing especially the walkthrough checklist thoroughly does require some amount of time to complete, but once you do it, you don't have to do it from scratch all the time. We kind of say do it from scratch every 5 years or so. So it's doable. So your geographic risk assessment basically figures out what your geography tells you. So it's going to help you determine your vulnerability to natural disasters, obviously, but depending on where you are, there can also be non-natural disaster factors. Like when I work with museums, I think a lot about depot museums because they're all right on train tracks and trains pass right by them even if they don't stop there anymore. And the things that travel over train tracks travel over trains because it's dangerous to put them on the highway. So we should think about that. And also potentially incidents inside your building, like maybe you are close to some kind of a weird traffic intersection where if somebody isn't careful, they'll come flying around the corner into your plate glass windows. It happens. Frighteningly, it happens. So I thought we might try it out. And I'm going to throw up, we're going to do a bunch of these. There's like 10 or 12. So we'll just go through and see. I'm going to put up a poll. And you should see a poll. It's asking you if you've had a flood. And then you can see the answers. We'll let people vote for a minute. And once everyone has voted, we will show everybody. And I think what'll be fun is to see, based on where different people are, we should get some widely different answers. It looks like voting is slowing down and we are close to 75% of people voted. I would be willing to bet that the other 25% are off. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this poll and share the results. And it looks like 2/3 of you say that flooding is a strong probability or possible. So flooding is always the first one because flooding, the 7% of you where flooding is improbable, I want to come work with you. So let's try another one. How about hurricane? So for hurricane, it's not nearly as strong the possibility. 13% say it's a strong probability. 6 say it's probable. 28 it's possible. 31 it's improbable. How about fire? What we say about fire. So let me share the results. That would help. So fire, it doesn't look like it's a strong probability for most people, but we're looking at almost half of you, close to 60%, saying it's somewhere possible to strong probable. So let's move on. Let's look at severe weather. So severe weather, strong rain, snow. We're in Texas, so snow, not so much. Although when it snows in Austin, the entire universe comes to a stop and everybody panics, which is pretty great. So look at those results. 74% of people say that it's a strong probability, and 13% of people say that it's probable. So yeah, I would agree that severe weather everywhere. Try another one. So pest invasion. And looking at this, I am not surprised that almost everybody had pest invasion as possible to strong probability, because we are in Texas, and Texas is all about all kinds of pests. In Texas, I've seen everything in collections from silverfish and cockroaches, which you might expect, to scorpions, which was not as much fun. So yeah, everyone should be prepared for pest invasion. Let's move on to some more human-caused ones now. How about hazardous materials or radiation accidents? Are those going to affect any of you? And so radically different results. You're probably seeing the vast majority of you are saying that's not something you're worried about, with only about 25% of you thinking it's a possibility. I would be willing to bet some of those people are down along the Gulf Coast, where there are lots of oil refineries, although I'm totally not going to swear to that. I also think about if you are on university campuses. Is it Texas A&M that has a nuclear reactor on campus? If you ever get the chance to tour it, it is very cool, but you want to make sure you know about things like that. Let's just do like 2 more. How about vandalism? I always think vandalism is kind of interesting because you're in a public building, oftentimes as an archives or cultural heritage institution. So, excuse me. So with vandalism, it looks like it's definitely something that's possible for some of you. There's a good chunk that it's not particularly possible as well. I actually would have thought that there would have been fewer people who said it was a remote possibility. So that is fascinating. And let's try one more. Let's try terrorism and see what happens there. All right, so most of you don't think that terrorism is a realistic possibility. 29% say possible, 4% say probable. And that feels about right. I think if you are in a government building, you're in a stronger position to worry about terrorism. I used to worry, and by worry, I mean think about, not actually worry. But when I first moved to Austin, the president was from Texas and had ties to the state, and I was in school 6 blocks from the Texas Capitol. And I always thought that felt like it might be a good target for terrorism. So you just never know. So there we go. I'm going to hide those results and get back to the slides. And now we have all had a chance to play with that a little bit. So I'm going, and that's a really low tech, like 1 through 5 kind of version. But I want to show you the rep tool for it because it's really fantastic. So this is the risk evaluation and planning program worksheet that looks at all kinds of geographical risks in much more detail. So you can see just in the natural disasters category, it has 13 or 14 things. And so that's interesting. But what's even more interesting is how they quantify the risk. They take your likelihood of occurrence, where you rate it 1 to 5, like we just did, and then you multiply it by the potential severity of damage. So maybe we will have, let's look at minor flooding because it'll be minor. So we might have a likelihood of minor flooding that's really high, that's a 5, but it's minor flooding, so the severity of damage is only going to be 5. But with a hurricane, we might have a likelihood of 3 and a severity of damage of 5, so our risk rating would be 15. And when you download this, you can download it as an Excel spreadsheet and plug in all of your numbers, and they will give you the keyword, like things that are, I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but say things that are 20 or above are the things you're really worried about, and then things that are 10 to 20 are your middling ones, and things that are below 10 you're not worried about. So it's really useful. It's also fun. It lets you think about all the possibilities. Oh, there we go. The next thing you're going to do is a facilities risk assessment. And that looks at specific issues with your building's infrastructure. And if you have more than one building that you're responsible for, you should do this assessment separately for each of those buildings. And if I were you and I were doing this, I would absolutely invite whoever manages your facilities to walk through the building with you, because there will be things on this checklist that you do not know the answers to, but they will. And so that's good, but also it's a chance for you to get to know each other and establish a rapport and a good working relationship, so that as you integrate them into your emergency response team, that relationship is strong. And we talked last week a lot about having your fire department come do a fire safety walkthrough. So things that we're going to look at. When we look at architecture, we're going to look at building construction. Is your building brick? Is it concrete with stainless steel girders? Is it wood? Because all of those things have different risks. And you'll also look at, when you're walking around the building, look for cracks, because there might be cracks in your building that you don't know about that indicate a bigger problem. You are going to look at your roof, because you want to know how old it is, how recently it's been replaced. Is it flat? Is it pitched? What condition is it in? Does it leak? Have you tried to fix the leaks a million times and not been able to? You're going to look at your windows and your skylights and your doors. Look at around the windows and doors, look at the seals. You probably can't look at the seals on your skylight, but if you could, that would be really useful, because skylights always have bad seals. You're also going to look for, I highly recommend, debris around your windows, especially insect debris and spider webs, because if there is debris around your windows, that means pests are trying to get in and they've probably found an entrance. So you want to keep windows and doors clean of debris, and check the condition of your weather stripping, because if you have an exterior door with no weather stripping, that's just like leaving the door wide open for critters to come in. We're in Texas, so you probably don't have a basement, but if you do, you want to look at if you're using the basement as a storage area. If it is your basement below the water table, are there leaks in your basement? Do you see any evidence of cracks or seepage? You're going to look at drainage. So that's things like the condition of your eaves, your gutters, your downspouts, your drains. How often are they cleaned? Sometimes the answer is never, and that can be a very scary answer. You want to look at if water is directed away from the building. You don't want water pooling around your foundation, because that can cause problems with your concrete. And you also want to make sure that water is draining properly. My favorite story about this is many years ago, when I was a brand new baby conservator doing probably my first 5 preservation assessments. It was a public library, and it was a miserably rainy day. I was outside walking around the building, looking at the building, and noticed that for any patrons to get in, they had to literally walk through a sheet of water, because the gutters had not been cleaned in ages. And because it was so fast and fierce and the gutters weren't able to do their job, they had water pooling at the base of the building. So the takeaway from that really is, it is awesome to walk around your building when it is a beautiful day and it is 80 degrees out. It's an excuse to go outside and play and be working. but one of the times you really need to walk around the exterior of your building is that day when it is miserable and rainy, and see how the rain is acting. I hate to have to tell you that. I am sorry. But you'll get a raincoat and an umbrella, and you'll feel virtuous. You're going to look at protection from fire. So you'll walk around and look at all your fire extinguishers and make sure that the needle is in the green, like in the picture. You'll look and see when they were last inspected, because that's always an interesting experiment. Even if you have a good fire extinguisher maintenance program, it's very easy for an extinguisher to get missed from time to time. You'll want to think about what kind of fire detection you have and what kind of fire suppression. Do you have an alarm system? Does the alarm ring directly to your fire department, or does it just make noise and someone has to actually call? Do you have enough smoke detectors? And are they hardwired into your system, or do you have to replace batteries? And if you have to replace batteries, what is that procedure? This is another place to make a play for having a fire marshal come out and visit you, because they will tell you so much about your building and be so helpful. And they will be excited to get the chance to help you. So give them a chance to do something fun. It's way more fun to go visit an archives than it is to go visit some boring office building downtown. And then you'll also check for appliance use and condition. I think last week I told you my story about the stove and the electrical cord draped over it in that museum. Yeah, I'm sure I told you that story because it's my favorite story. So look at your appliance use and condition. Are you unplugging kitchen appliances at night? Do you have octopus outlets with too many things plugged into one outlet? Are your cords in good shape? Are they frayed? Et cetera, et cetera. And then we get into protection from water, and this is fun. So one of the first things I do when I go to look at a building is look up and look at if they have acoustic ceiling tile, look at that ceiling tile, because that tells you a lot about what kind of leakage you have going on. So look up. And if you have ceiling tile that looks like the ceiling tile in this photograph, get it replaced so that you know when you have new leaks or when leaks are recurring. So this is where you're going to look at pipe leaks, plumbing problems, and there may be things that are ongoing that you know about. If you need water detectors, this is where you are going to investigate where you need them. If you have them, are they working? Who's responsible for monitoring them? All that fun stuff. Probably you're in Texas, so it's not terribly likely that you have a basement. But if you have a basement, do you need a sump pump? And if you have a sump pump, does it do the job it's designed to do? More likely is you're going to look to make sure all of your valuable materials are stored above ground. And by above ground, I mean not in the basement, but I also mean that everything is at least 4 inches off the floor. Because since most water emergencies are small water emergencies, if you have things lifted up 4 inches, that saves you an awful lot of heartache. So if you have things that you can't get onto shelves that are on the floor, look at putting them up on boards or on pallets. See how you can get creative and get them off the floor. And this is also when you're going to think about, what do your staff know about access to shutting off your water main? Do you need any special tools for that? Who has access to your mechanical rooms? What's going on in your mechanical rooms? It's great if you can look at your air handlers and your HVAC system and like look at drip pans and see if there's mold growing in your drip pans, because if there is mold growing in your drip pans, chances are mold spores are just being blasted out through your building. And speaking of mechanical rooms, here comes our HVAC systems. And what you are looking at in this picture is a chiller boiler system, which is something that a lot of university campuses have, where your HVAC system works by passing air over cold water or over hot water and mixing those two airs to get the right temperature and forcing that through the vents. Yeah, they are. So, and the chiller boilers are usually in a central plant, but there are pipes throughout your building that move that water around. You want to know what kind of a system you have. So do you have a chiller boiler system? Do you have a compressor system similar to what you have in your house? Do you have a heat pump? Because all of them have their own particular kinds of complications. So you want to know what you're dealing with. You also want to know what the maintenance situation is. Does somebody do tune-ups on them regularly? Does somebody come out every year at the start of air conditioning season to give it the once over? Or do you just assume it's okay until it's not okay? And along with that, you also want to check the filter change schedule. If your filters don't get changed, obviously they become less effective and they filter out less mold and dirt and dust. But in my experience, another reason to ask about filter changes is if I go to the building manager and say, hey, how often are your air conditioner filters changed? And they can say, I don't care what the answer is, but whatever the answer is, it's like, we change them every 3 months and they're XYZ kind of filter and we keep a log of that. Then I feel much better about general building maintenance because they're on that particular task. If somebody says, I don't know, we change them when we feel like it, or I didn't know they were supposed to be changed, I get worried about building maintenance in general. I talked about looking at your drip pans and looking for any kinds of mold or leaks in the system. This is also when you can think about the schedule of operation. So hopefully your air conditioners all run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's also when you can think about what kind of environmental monitoring you do. And when you can think about in the summer, do you raise your temperature gradually and lower gradually in the winter so that you get the most bang from your buck out of your HVAC system? And one of the rules of thumb about mechanical rooms is that you don't want to store non-mechanical room stuff in them. They shouldn't be the place you're storing your extra shelves for your library shelving or the extra stacking chairs that you have. It should just be mechanical room storage. So that gives you a lot to look at. As far as security, this is definitely when you're looking at locks and alarms to make sure that they are sufficient in doing their job. But it's also when you should look at who has keys, who has access to spaces, to make sure that you know who all those people are, because A, they're useful to have in the emergency plan so you know who can get you into places. But also, if there are people who no longer need access to places but still have access, you might want to remove that access from them just as a basic security thing. It's when you look at your security patrol, do you have a security guard? Do they drive by your building at night? Do you have, if you're in a big, like if you're in a federal building, you probably have some kind of a guard on the premises. How are they interacting with the archives? What are your closing procedures like? Are your closing procedures laid out in a formal policy so you know that you check XYZ places and turn out lights in this particular order? Or is it just kind of catch as catch can, let's turn the lights out and go home? It's a good idea to drive by at night from time to time and check on your exterior lighting to make sure that your exterior lighting is doing the job. Bulbs, right, especially in the summer when we get there when it's light and we leave when it's light, you might drive by at 10 o'clock at night and notice that a bulb's burned out that you didn't know about. So check your exterior lighting. It's also a good idea to make contact with your security or police officers as part of this process. And then on to housekeeping. And there's our friend, the silverfish. Ugh, I hate silverfish more than anything. They're so gross. So in housekeeping, you're going to be looking at things like safe storage of cleaning supplies. I can't tell you how many times I have visited collections and seen cleaning supplies stored on a shelf above collection materials, which I think intuitively you should know is not a good idea. It's also where you will look at pest management strategies. Are you using integrated pest management techniques? Are you doing any pest monitoring? What kinds of pests are you finding? It's where you will look at your food and drink policies, and what hopefully in an archives, you've got pretty good food and drink policies for your stacks and for your reading room. People may want to have a cup of tea at their desk or a snack at their desk. You have to figure out that particular issue. It's also where you look at plants, because as much as I know people love plants and they're pretty and they make people feel a little less awful about having to be in an office, they also attract insects and can raise humidity levels in buildings. So the best practice for archives would not be to have any plants. And it's a good time to look at your trash removal, both inside your building and on the exterior of your building. At the end of the day, are trash cans outside your building overflowing, which might be the case on a university campus? How often is your dumpster being emptied? Is that sufficient? We are closing in on the end of this, I promise. Construction. Construction, fire is always a thing with construction, and I think I mentioned last week the big, just devastating fire at the university in Kansas that happened because of a construction issue. So if you are lucky enough to have a construction project going on, because construction means you're getting hopefully upgraded facilities, you also just need to make sure that everything is happening safely. Who's responsible for fire safety? Are the workers using fire guards for welding and cutting? If your fire alarm system is out because of the construction, is there a fire watch system going on? And the other thing that comes along with any kind of a construction project, they all come with gigantic dumpsters that are behind your building. And those dumpsters are really good homes for rodents. and they are close enough that the rodents might decide to just come for a visit into your library, which we really don't want. So you want to make sure those dumpsters stay clean and free of critters. Then the last thing on my list of things you're looking at for a facilities assessment is insurance. Do you have insurance on your building? Do you have insurance on your collections? If you do, when is the last time that was updated? If it hasn't been for a few years, it might be time to talk with your insurance agent about what needs to happen if your levels are still where they need to be. You also want to think about what is covered. In archives, most of our material is irreplaceable, so you do need to think about that. But for the things that are replaceable, you want to think about what replacement costs are specified. Is it actual value or is it replacement cost? Because they can be different. There can be depreciation. If you bought, say we're looking at your equipment and you bought a computer 2 years ago, it gets damaged in a flood and you need to replace it. The value of that computer is different than what it's going to cost to replace that computer. I think that makes sense. You also want to know what the claim procedures are. How do you make a claim? Who do you call? It's really important to know who to call, because if you have a disaster, you want your insurance agent in at the very beginning. They may want to go in with you to assess damage even. And it's not really insurance, but this is a good enough place to put it so it doesn't have its own slide. You want to look at data backup procedures. Do you have adequate backups for your data? How is that happening? How are you sure that that's happening as it should be happening? So that's the big monster one. And then the very last risk assessment task is to do an emergency history. And that's because if something has happened one time, it is entirely possible that it will happen again. Right? It's instructive. If you go to like a library that has a leaky roof and it begins to rain, it's like watching the library ballet, because everybody knows exactly which trash can they need to pick up and where they need to move it, and it is beautiful to see. So how are you going to deal with the things that recur? You're going to ask yourself if you can fix past problems or create strategies for minimizing unfixable problems. And finally, don't forget to ask the people who've worked in your building the longest. If you have somebody who's worked in your building for 20 years, chances are they remember a lot of things that you may not know about. So sit them down with a cup of coffee and ask them what's happened, because those are things you might want to plan for as well. Whew, that was a lot of talking. So I think there's a few questions already, and I'm going to start looking at them. There's a question or a note from Donna about it's probable when your climate control fails due to electricity or aged parts that need replacing. I'm assuming that's about mold growth. And I'm assuming that I missed that at the time, and it is a very on-point comment. Donna wants to know if there's a financial value on data and a financial value on what's irreplaceable. Those are really interesting questions. And one of the things that my code of ethics as a conservator says is that I am not allowed to talk about values. I'm not allowed to be involved in any kind of estimating values. So my inclination is to say there probably is, but I would have no idea of how you would assign those values. And that is why you have an insurance agent or an appraiser who does that. Let's see. I am looking for more questions. I'm going to give it another couple of seconds to see if anybody types anything. But on the other hand, maybe that was such a data dump that I just inflicted on you that you don't have questions right now, and you will have them at 3 in the morning. And if so, that is completely legit. All righty, I guess I don't see any more questions coming in. So we're just going to move on to homework. Peggy, was that you? Were you going to say something?
I have nothing to add. Just
All right.
going to sit here quietly until we wrap up.
Excellent. I just thought I heard some crackling that might have been you. So for next week, if you are following along and trying to get your plan written, this is a pretty big week in terms of homework. You're going to do some research so you can choose a plan template. And you're going to download those rep worksheets and complete them, which I realize may be hard to happen now if you're working from home and don't have access to your building. And if that's the case, you will just do it when you can get back into your building. But on the other hand, if you have access to your building, this might be a good time to do some of it because your building should be pretty quiet. And as always, there's my email address. As you are working on this week, don't hesitate to be in touch with me. Believe me, I am working from home hardcore and would be thrilled to hear from somebody. So send me a note and we can chat about whatever you need to talk about disasters. And with that, I think that's all I have to say.
Rebecca, in your handouts, you do have examples of books and articles, correct?
I don't know that I do because there are so many good web resources that it is easier to track down. But if anybody wants some books and articles, I can do some research and find them for you.
Sounds
I'm
good.
thinking there is specifically a book with a red cover that is published by the ALA, but it is, of course, the book with the red cover, and all of you know how the book with the red cover thing goes. You all have seen that meme.
Sounds good. All right, well then let's wrap up, and the recording will be posted on the gallery of recordings for THRAB, and we'll meet back here next week.
Yeah, and next week we'll do contact lists. It'll be super fun.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.